What's up, folks? So, yesterday, because I was bored and a little weird, and I do shit like this, I was watching several interviews with Charles Manson from the 80s. I believe they're both from the 80s. And Charles Manson said some interesting things. And he says some things that I found to be quite true. The first thing I've determined for myself is that Charles Manson is not insane. He's just a really good actor. Anyone that thinks that this man is crazy, now, he's certainly eccentric. And I believe that he directed these murders. I'm not one of the surprisingly great number of, like, Manson fans. It's kind of strange, but, you know, but he's not insane. And he has some good points to make. Because the guy that was interviewing him in one of the interviews was asking him, you know, how do you feel about these murders? And Manson was like, you know, why are you always asking me how I feel about these murders? Why don't you ask yourself how you feel about these murders? Why don't you ask yourself how an ex-con just got out of being in prison for 22 years can come out and pick up your children that you forgot on the streets, and they end up going and doing something like this? Ask yourself how you feel about this murder. And I thought that was a really good fucking point, because it points out one of the problems that we have as a group. And it's a problem in the Charles Manson case. It's a problem in things like Columbine and 9/11. That with the Manson situation, everyone wants to look at Charles Manson. They want to ask, is Charles Manson crazy? What was Charles Manson's motivations? Why did he do this? How did he do this? You know, but that's not really the important question here. The important question here is, exactly like Charlie said, how do you let your kids get to the point that they can be taken in by something like this? What's wrong with your society when kids are abandoned by their families and society at large, and the only place they have to go is to someone like Charles Manson? And that's the important question here, but no, you don't want to ask that question. People don't want to have that question asked. The news doesn't want to ask it because they don't want to piss off their viewership by calling them fucking nuts. So this question doesn't get asked. Look at Columbine, all right? You know, people talk about, you know, was it the movies? Was it the music? Was it the video games? Was it the guns? And that's, you know, this has been said before. That's not the important question. The important question is, and I'm even willing to concede that violent music with violent themes and violent video games and violent movies can have an effect on an already damaged mind. But you have to ask yourself, how does the mind get damaged like that? How is a person left with so little adult supervision that music and video games and movies and whatever becomes their only companion, becomes their only source of information about how life is and how life should be? That's what you have to ask yourself. And you can see that nobody wants to do this, because that's how Rudy Giuliani got a standing ovation at one of the Republican debates when he asked Ron Paul to apologize for saying that it was our fault that 9/11 happened. And it goddamn is. But nobody wants to take responsibility for that. They want to talk about, how can we get the terrorists? How can we get them? They don't want to talk about, how did we get to this point? And we went in the complete opposite direction on that one. It was our involvement in the Middle East that caused that, so what did we do? We increased our involvement in the Middle East. It was our disenfranchising of youth and assault on the youth culture that caused things like the Manson family and the Manson family murders to happen. What did we do? We start the war on drugs. We destroy another generation of young people. That's what we do. We go the wrong fucking way on this. And, you know, with Columbine, what do? We make schools more almost militant. We bring in more cops. We bring in more metal detectors. We bring in more people to scare the kids. Well, what you really need is a more friendly environment so that people can not feel, you know, scared to get help. So we go the complete opposite direction on this. I guess really what I'm saying to you is the most frightening thing is that we should be taking Charles Manson's advice. and he said that he didn't really necessarily consider the murder a bad thing, and I guess there's different ways that you could take that, but the way I look at it is that the Manson family murders didn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Of course, the actual murders were bad, and it's unfortunate for the people that were killed, but the outcome could have been something positive. It could have been focusing on helping the youth so they don't fall into that kind of situation, or focusing on mental health, or focusing on any number of things. But it wasn't. It ended up being a bad thing. We could have turned 9/11 into a positive. We could have changed the way that we approach the world. We could have changed the way that we approach policies and all this shit. But we didn't. We went the opposite direction on that. With Columbine, we could have helped the kids. We could have done more shit like that. Instead, we made the schools more militant and more prison-like. So, listen to Charles Manson.